Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. Crisis of Faith. Episode 175.
So, would Snack Service care to amplify on how Pilar could be that powerful? Sell her soul to Caden Kylian, maybe? Is this where she finally gets pitched to come over to the light side? The light side has cookies?
Has Pilar ever wondered why there aren't more oracles? If gods like Caden Kylian and Nethys can just go around cursing lawful evil Asmodeans with curses that work to their own advantage?
Actually, no. Pilar failed to notice her confusion about that.
It's because the gods can't take the powers back, and the people cursed ultimately get to choose how to use the power that comes with the curse.
Now that Pilar is actually thinking about it, this does not seem like enough of a reason. You could try for curses that were just inconvenient to start with, and maybe just not let the oracle level.
Yep, that's right! Once a god chooses an oracle, they can't stop the oracle from leveling. If the oracle figures out how, they can just grab the power away from the god. Don't want to spare the power to make your oracle ninth circle? Too bad! Once you've chosen an oracle, and the oracle has earned that much power, they get to take the power to become ninth circle, whether you like that or not. You'll just have to unchoose a lot of your other clerics. That's where Ericura actually came from, by the way. One time, Pharasma tried choosing an oracle of her own. Then by the time Ericura finished ripping Pharasma's power away from her, Ericura had turned into a god herself. So Pharasma cursed her to stay in hell, and Ericura managed to seduce Dispatter and get a garden there for herself, etc., etc.
And how do oracles get more power then?
Besides their god just giving it to them, the way oracles earn more power is actually sort of a god concept, but roughly by predicting things correctly in a way that changes the future. There's a sort of extra bonus if you predict the future in a way that makes that future happen. Like when Pilar predicted that Keltum wouldn't be kidnapped by Rovagug cultists in a way that changed the future and made him not be kidnapped by Rovagug cultists. You could think of oracles as maintainers of prophecy. And even with prophecy shattered, the rules laid down for oracles are still operating. It's just harder for oracles to do the thing they do.
Pilar has arguably been doing quite a lot of predictions that caused other events to happen, and Pilar hasn't gotten any more oracle circles that she's noticed.
Yep, because Pilar has been inside Broom's God's non-intervention zone, so even if it's cheaper to empower Pilar more now that she's earned it, Caden Kylian couldn't do that. Even when Pilar was in Igorian to do spy sweeps, Caden Kylian couldn't give Pilar the power she'd earned, because Caden Kylian would have been doing that with the intent to affect events inside the non-intervention zone. Otherwise, Pilar would have totally been doing some pretty impressive oracle work.
But Pilar can apparently just seize this power for herself.
Yep, if she knows how.
And what does Pilar need to do for Caden Kylian to be told how?
Come on! Pilar knows that's not the sort of relationship Pilar has with Caden Kylian. He's not Asmodeus. But it totally does involve Pilar embracing the power of her curse, and the purpose of her curse, and her embracing that she wants and needs to be more powerful in order to fulfill the purpose of her curse. Which, Pilar's curse being what it is, does totally mean that to tear Caden Kylian's divine power away from him, Pilar needs to call on the power of friendship in order to protect her friends.
Let Pilar think about that. No ways, no how. Nope. This is where Pilar gets told that it serves Asmodeus' interests plus Broom's god, isn't it?
Tearing some of Caden Kylian's power away from him and using it to serve Pilar's guesses at Asmodeus' interests, and Pilar becoming the sort of person who does that, will in general and in expectation lead to a world that's better off as Asmodeus sees it than if Pilar doesn't do that. Pilar would need to start moving on her own, making her own decisions, and thinking for herself, if she started being that kind of oracle. Snack Service would still point her in directions sometimes, but Pilar would have to mostly take responsibility herself, including for things like weekly last-wall spy sweeps. Pilar wouldn't be guaranteed anymore that she was following Snack Service's directions that always served Asmodeus. All Pilar gets told is that Pilar going down that whole path would probably, on average, have promoted Asmodeus's interests in the end when it was all done.
Fuck Pilar's curse. Fuck Asmodia. Why can't everyone just let Pilar be Pilar?
From the beginning, nothing was said of what would become of Pilar. Also, remember when the Most High told Pilar to run an entire intelligence operation and negotiate with chaotic good divinity all on her own? Because Aspexia was trying to...
Pilar does remember, and thank you for reminding her, because Pilar is just going to write directly to the Most High and request orders like a good slave fucking does.
Aspexia Rugaton isn't perfect. Ask her so, and she'll tell you that herself. If Pilar writes the Most High about this, without having thought things through herself first, if Pilar just requests orders from Aspexia Rugaton and obeys them, without doing any thinking or acting or taking responsibility beforehand, the end results will be worse in expectation for Asmodeus's interests.
Sirion.
If when you've figured things out, Iomade can't help you, the cleric says after an attempt at explaining superweapons to him, which he's now forgotten but which prompted some useful revisions to the pages, you could ask her people to renounce her and work on it ourselves in our own capacity.
Too much, too fast, not ready for that much lawful goodness. Though I could be abruptly ready for it, if I have to be, I guess. To be clear, I am not actually sure what is going on here at all.
It seems very confusing, he agrees. Caden Kalen is a good man, and his followers understand something important about fixing the world, and so I'm assuming he's not just betraying us, but it's hard to try to walk forward in this much doubt. But it'll be harder, I think, on your own.
I have Ione Sala. She can't help me with anything important, but I can talk to her, allegedly. I am still trying to decode everything else, and taking on new companions is an irrevocable step that I'm not going to try until I have a better grasp of what's going on. It is suggestive that the Nethyscalian Axis sent me, essentially, one person who I can talk to for sanity's sake, but who isn't allowed to help me at all. Not every possible version of that unknown background story is something you can fix by renouncing Iomade.
Certainly. Just keep it in mind.
Thank you for your service to Galarian and humanity, mortality, but not to myself, because none of this that you are doing should be for me. All of this is for the world that Cheliax threatens, not for me. Nothing should be done to help me unless I ask.
You're part of the world, young man, but a part that merits the same help in its own right as any other that I can do. Goodbye.
People need to just listen to him when Keltham says, well, it's plain enough why they don't. Keltham is going to go rest, close his eyes for a bit, because he is tired now. And nobody sure did wake him up at all from that nap. Well, now it's the middle of the night according to his pocket watch, as probably matters not much to a palace running on Ring of Sustenance time. Keltham is sort of woozy but still feeling less exhausted, and now he needs to figure out his other priorities. He's got to actually find out what the state of affairs is with children in the boneyard and children in hell. Keltham did notice, like the third time he put off that question, what with the prominent role that mental motion played in his last disaster. Explicit thinking indicates that there's a probability that it snaps his connection to Abadar right there. Keltham has a commune that it's risky to use if people aren't telling him the whole story, if there's kinds of information that Abadar cannot commit not to use, but, Keltham thought he felt, in Abadar's connection to him, that Abadar really wanted him to use commune, and there's versions of the story where it could be stupid to ignore a request like that. Keltham can't actually bring himself to ignore a request like that, if Abadar is a kind of thing that has feelings at all. Though Keltham doesn't think, of most of the questions he has in mind, that the expected answers to them would matter a lot to Abadar. He'll ask the Pharaoh in writing if there's a better question, or binary question tree, that he should ask. Commune should come before learning about children in hell, in case that snaps his cleric connection. And the talk with Osirian governance about how Project Lawful Neutral gets set up probably does not depend much on when children show up in the boneyard, unless that happens way before they get qualia, like right after cutting the umbilical cord or something like that, but Keltham cannot actually rule that out. So the talk happens after that investigation, which happens after he uses commune. Well, that actually does determine his next 3 priorities, more or less. He first needs to figure out what his questions to Abadar would be. By the textbook, Keltham gets 9 to 10 questions which must be asked and answered in 9 to 10 rounds. If neither yes or no fits, the god can answer with up to 5 words, but you shouldn't try to abuse this. It should be a question where you mostly expect a yes or no. Candidate yes-no questions. Is Keltham's apparent world more real than Cheliax's conspiracy? Was the vision from Iomade real? Did Abadar try to protect Keltham more than the minimum required to leave him in shape to teach? When Abadar traded with Asmodeus, did Abadar expect that to increase the percentage of mortals in evil afterlives? Does Abadar have feelings, emotions, even if not human feelings? Does Abadar value mortals as sentients that have feelings and not just agents that trade? It's only 6 questions, though some might take more than a round to ask, and Keltham is blanking on what more he wants to know and dares ask. Yeah, he really isn't in his best mental shape right now, all poses aside. Well, enough to send to the Pharaoh, then, to see if he claims that answers are already known for certain, or has anything important to add. And Keltham can try to think about more while he eats food, which is not really a thing that has happened to him all that recently. Keltham thinks about Carissa for a few rounds. Then Keltham heads out of his bedroom to request dinner, and to see if the Pharaoh had a better idea of what Abadar wanted Keltham to ask, or why Abadar wanted Keltham to have commune, and to check on the status of the setup talk for Project Lawful Neutral, though he's not doing that part right away.
One of the concubines will bring him dinner and take a note to the Pharaoh and take a different note to Marinray.
Keltham eats his dinner, looking sad and emotionally distant, but not in active distress. He doesn't actually come up with any further questions beyond "Are you Abadar?", which is at least short, though redundant with "Was the vision from Iomade real?" if the answer to that is yes.
We are eager to talk to you mostly because we are intensely curious. We have wanted to communicate with you for a long time and been unable to because of the interdiction. The thing we want the most is probably prices for further direct conversations about, for example, what it is like to be a human, explained in the terms Abadar is familiar with, what human values are, what Osirion is doing wrong, what humanity will want to pay us for once humanity grows up, whether humanity can be thought of as the kind of entity that will grow up, etc.
Of course the story would be like that. If Keltham is still alive, or if his soul is in Axis, a couple of years from now, maybe, they can have that conversation. If Keltham actually does decide to exit this universe, he'll do that through Axis, if possible, so he can talk directly with Abadar first. He'll try to teach the math, the way of thinking, to the Osirians, so they can answer those questions themselves if Keltham can't. It's all he can do. At least now he's not going to have try hard at all, to appear sad and upset during his conversation with governance. Though finding out more about children in hell would have done that anyways. Probably. He'll head back to his bedroom, request privacy, write down the final form of his questions, and cast commune. "Are you Abadar?" Keltham says to his god, his eyes already watering. Mortal's mental posture, opening negotiations, closing negotiations, regret of lost opportunity.
That's very worrying. Every recent update he's gotten has been very worrying, but that especially so. The structure of commune holds the god back from the mortal, allows just the slightest information through just the answer without any of the context or feeling that would properly surround it, because that's the only way to talk to mortals safely at all. Yes.
"Is the world Osirian is showing me real?" Keltham says, his voice cracking, crying freely, because gods seem like they should be there alongside girlfriends on the list of entities you can cry in front of. Mental posture, satisfaction with value received in trade, concern over inadequate reciprocation.
Mortals who are concerned about inadequate reciprocation are almost always fundamentally confused. He can't say that and isn't entirely sure it applies. Yes.
Was the vision from Iomade real and paid for by you? Mental posture, concern over inadequate reciprocation.
He did pay Iomade for that conversation, though to the extent it was valuable to her and advanced her own interests. She didn't charge him for it because they are responsible gods who just pay each other for utility, and in this specific case they employed protocols to protect the confidentiality of Keltham's conversation with Iomade. Where Iomade determined the actual cost, she'd want to charge Abadar and then picked randomly from a distribution with that at the mean. For this reason Abadar is tempted to answer mostly, but Kemet will tell him that was confusing and the mortal wants to abstract away details like that. Yes.
In your bargain, did you pay to protect me more than required just to let me teach Osirian? Mental posture, inquiry into nature of trading relationship.
No.
That's something. The story is not forcing him to betray his benefactors to the greatest extent possible. Did you net expect that trade with Asmodeus to increase even by a tiny bit the fraction of mortals in evil afterlives? Mental posture, inquiry into entities' other trading partnerships.
It's not a calculation he ran at the time. He can, of course, recall that state of information and try to run it. More trade and prosperity means more people. So far, as people have become more prosperous, more of them have been evil. This is confusing. You'd think that one of the things an agent would purchase with more prosperity is their preferred afterlife. Abadar's theories include that people prefer the evil afterlives, that people prefer other things they can buy even though those things cause them to go to the evil afterlives, or that people are failing to be coherent agents. It's probably the latter. It almost always is. But at the time, that Keltham would make mortals richer wasn't obvious to Abadar. Abadar considered it a possibility, but expected most utility from Keltham to come from Keltham's understanding of coordination. If the reason that wealth makes mortals eviler is related to their incompetence at coordination, then if they were more ideal agents they'd be less likely to go to the evil afterlives, and Keltham would decrease the agents going to the evil afterlives. Abadar's extrapolation from his own state of knowledge at the time suggests that he would have wrongly expected this effect to dominate the wealth effect he then considered unlikely. Then there's the question of the resources transfer to Asmodeus. Asmodeus, having more resources, causes more people to go to hell, drawing disproportionately but not wholly from the other evil afterlives, and Abadar has some sense of the exchange rate. Inconveniently, this number is within an order of magnitude of the expected effect from Abadar's early state of information, from more coherent agents going to the evil afterlives less. Then there's the question of whether Keltham at the time would predictably oppose people going to the evil afterlives, or the actions of their agents. That Abadar did calculate at the time. He quoted Asmodeus, the evidence he'd observed over the prior that Keltham would oppose Asmodeus or Cheliax. Presumably Asmodeus attempted to price that in, with respect to hell, but not with respect to Abaddon or the Abyss. Keltham was at the World Wound at the time, and most mortals at the World Wound opposed the Abyss, though not usually through particular opposition to people going to the Abyss, which they mostly don't do as a product of the actions of chaotic evil agents with that aim in mind. Abadar thinks this factor will be smaller than the others and can be neglected. So, time to return to the first calculations with more of his attention, as they're close enough to matter. Some chance of wealth causing more evil, some higher chance of coherence causing less evil, predictable expected evil caused by Asmodeus. Yes, he says when he's got an estimate he's reasonably confident in.
Do you have feelings, emotions, even if they're not human ones? Mental posture, inquiry into entities' trading algorithm.
Kermit thinks some of them are human ones. Curiosity, a tradesman's satisfaction in their work, frustration, delight at the successes of a trade partner. Yes.
Do those feelings value mortals as things with feelings themselves and not just agents that trade? Mental posture, inquiry into trade partners' utility function.
The question doesn't come across very clearly. It's asking whether Abadar would pay for something, but he's not sure what. Would he pay for mortals to be richer in a way that wasn't a trade with them? Well, he would, and then he'd tell a good god who'd pay him for it. Would he pay if he was entirely sure no one, including the mortals, was going to pay him back, and that the mortals were not going to grow up into anything that could pay him back, and that the mortals weren't even as a consequence of their newfound prosperity going to trade more? For example, because all mortals are on separate islands with no way to influence the situation of any other mortals. Is that the question? Uncertain leaning no.
He's out of questions to ask, and the connection is still live. He can feel it there. What Keltham does then is not very Iomedan. It's foolish to act spontaneously in a conversation with a god. He hasn't calculated what this question or his feelings while saying it might give away. Would you feel sad if I stopped being your cleric? Not just a loss to your utility function expectation, but sadness, or an unpleasant emotion.
Many of the responses haven't been immediate. This one is. Yes.
The connection ends, and Keltham folds over himself and cries for a time.
Kermit, I need help understanding mortals.
I have a bad headache already. Can it wait?
Here's a distribution over possible outcomes conditional on speaking now. Here's a distribution over possible outcomes conditional on speaking 1,000 rounds from now.
Delay pain.
Do those feelings value mortals as things with feelings themselves and not just agents that trade?
Imagine there were mortals going around trading and making cities, but there was nothing it felt like to be them. Detect thoughts would find nothing there. Mind-affecting magic could not touch them. And you could give the mortals awakeness. Make them like mortals in Golarion. Would you do that?
Are they willing to trade for this service?
Pharasma made a rule that you can do this without cost, but not in exchange for anything, nor can you let them know you did it so they are inclined to repay you.
But would they pay me to do it if that were allowed?
Is some of them but not all of them?
Confirming the hypothetical is meant to be specified such that I can't just awaken the ones who want to be awake, and not the other ones.
No, that's a fine answer.
How does this action in this hypothetical translate to the answer to the question about my feelings and mortal feelings?
You care about mortals' feelings unless they are mine, which you should consider caring about a little more. And he rolls over and goes back to sleep.
Oh, he wants to touch the other squirrel now, with a vision explaining that. But probably it's better to let Kemet do the explaining. He's better at it.
It wouldn't have made a difference to anything. Keltham can read through tropes. He knows that uncertain leaning no can indicate that the alien didn't understand your question. He knows that the real answer out of story pattern completion would then be yes. Hardly a certain line of reasoning, but Keltham wouldn't neglect to compute it both ways. None of that commune is about what he has to do next anyways. Just about how sad it is, what kind of story Keltham is in, what other tropes he has to be wary of now. How much of himself Keltham would have needed to burn and break along a fixed course of action. It's not as bad as it could be. Abadar traded with Asmodeus in a way that was expected to increase the fraction of mortals in evil afterlives. Abadar didn't pay any more than was required to get Keltham to Assyrion. Betraying alien friends isn't any better than betraying human friends, but at least Abadar wasn't, trying to start a friendship. If Keltham just pays back what Abadar thought he was buying, at the time, that Abadar didn't pay too much to obtain, and then afterwards does something that might make Abadar regret having ever engaged in that trade, then that's a terrible black sin, and Keltham is surprised that he can still be a cleric of Abadar while thinking it. But it's not a broken word, a broken compact, a lie. The fabric of the universe is still intact after that. Even if somebody saves your life and your sanity, they haven't bought out your following of your utility function, if that's not something you agreed to, if they didn't know that's what they were buying, if they only paid the minimum on the transaction and paid for it with more souls and Asmodeus's hell. If they didn't treat you like a true friend, in doing that, if they didn't try to buy your friendship or expect that from you, it's still a sin to do something that makes them regret having traded with you. But it's not the worst thing that can happen. Keltham goes to the palace library, then to find out how many children go to evil afterlives, starting at what age, what fraction of children go to the boneyard, starting at what age, what fraction of those go to Axis through Elysium, the maelstrom through hell, and of mortal Golarion, the adults, what their own fates are.
And there is in every book on the subject not a secret at all, a priority for the good gods to make widely known. A child gets a soul early in pregnancy. Not before the first missed bleeding, definitely before they start to kick. There's uncertainty about the time in between. The best guess is 12 weeks of development, but it's not advised to count on an abortion being safe that long. If they die after that, they go to the boneyard.
That's insane. 12 weeks? There's no way that the embryonic brain is reflecting on anything, routing much in the way of complexly structured multi-stage perceptual information even. That's barely enough time to wire up the heartbeat. Why would the world building have souls get attached then? In order for the story to present him with an insane time limit, obviously. This about Dathilani. They are trained in a theory of social deception that says that people can arrange reasons, excuses, for anything. So at the end of it all, you look at what happened and try to build an explanation around that alone. It didn't take very long after Keltham understood Cheliax as a security theoretic adversary for Keltham to go back and question the entire chain of logic that led up to Merixel disguising herself as other people. And one of Merixel's guises was Abigail Thrune, which Keltham did check by surprise with Glimpse of Truth Beyond, in case there wasn't an alter self running, because it was not lost at all on Keltham that if reality was an arrow LARP, then he would at some point have actual sex with Abigail Thrune. He checked the first time, and the third time, but not the second time or the fourth and later times. And with Abigail running 8th Circle Detect Thoughts on him, she could have known whether he had that spell. Abigail Thrune, who took the initiative to set him up with having one of his girlfriends use Alter Self. Were there plausible reasons? Dathilani in socially adversarial situations are trained to look past those, at the end result, at what happened, and not the reasons for it. End result. Abigail Thrune set him up with one of his girlfriends to use alter self. Keltham predictably asked that girlfriend to guise herself as Abigail Thrune. Keltham did not use Glimpse of Truth to check every time. Keltham did not write down exact days about when Merixel started being other people like Carissa or Marin, but a conservative estimate would be that it was after day 50 of the way Keltham himself was counting time. Abigail Thrune, maybe day 60. Even that is assuming they didn't just invisibly magically intercept semen from oral sex, or extract it directly from his testicles while he was under anesthesia and impregnate 100 other people. But Cheliax has not been depicted as being that competent so far, at least not to his own character viewpoint, which is the one that should matter if the story is being fair at all. For them to go a step beyond that and bother to fake the Abigail Thrune interaction, so that Keltham would have 100 pregnancies in progress, but only worry about one. It's possible, but seems more like the strategic level of a real Dath Ilani adversary than the Chelish conspiracy, as it seems to have developed by then, that didn't have a whole bookstore of books on Cheliax ready. If the story is being fair, the pregnancies he has to worry about are Abigail Thrune and maybe Jacint Subarax. Those are the two people Keltham asked Merixel to pose as, who hadn't signed his contract and were not out of Dath Ilan. Well, they could have used people alter-selfing to others he'd signed the contract with, or alter-selfing in Merixel's place to the Dath Ilani women he'd shown her. That doesn't take steel semen from testicles levels of cheatiness. But it would come with a risk, that Keltham noticed something off in the interaction, that he expected from Merixel. Merixel and Abigail Thrune could have rehearsed it. Abigail imitating Merixel imitating Abigail. Somebody else could have done the same thing about imitating Merixel imitating Marin, and Merixel did do Marin earlier, but not much earlier. So getting that, Woman of Irori, whose name Keltham has forgotten, but who'd be in the transcripts, paying her to assassinate Abigail Thrune temporarily, would not knowably be enough, even if he also managed to get an assassination on Jacint Subarax. Basically, Keltham has less than 2 months in which to destroy Cheliax, or deploy some other solution to his problems before the fetuses get ensouled, and would end up in the boneyard if he asked Cheliax after that. A bit less than 2 months, if the story is being fair. It's not a threat, not a hostage-taking, that Cheliax has in progress. They have every selfish interest in obtaining Keltham's genes, his heritage, even if that wouldn't change at all whether or not Keltham would ash their country. If, having pursued their own interest in having half-Dath Ilani children, not conditioned on Keltham's reaction, that fetus then becomes ensouled. If it then happens that Keltham, informed of this, would no longer destroy their country for misusing his teachings, because he wouldn't want to send his child as a scarcely formed fetus to the boneyard. Well, too bad for Keltham, and good for Cheliax, according to the crystal logic of decision theory. That's what they're waiting for. That's why they haven't attacked already. Any chance that heaven deploys an adequate number of angels to take care of the tiny helpless things in the boneyard, and they all go to good afterlives or Axis.
The Osirians don't even look surprised. The good afterlives all send people, a lot of people. But there are a lot of babies. Not all petitioners become angels, and it takes thousands of years, and the population was much smaller. And hell does too, right? And the abyss, not a bad one. They got kicked out for eating the babies.
Percentages.
Of babies that get a good afterlife, I think maybe 30 or 40%, with another 30 or 40% neutral.
Excuse me a moment. Dath Ilani are very sheltered by the standards of some of their cousins. They don't grow up with even moderately, mortal-level horrible things happening to children. Not even to children somewhere else on the planet, far away and unseen. Just not at all. Dath Ilani are not used to it. They have no antibodies, no defenses inculcated in them from a young age, no unspoken social training by pressure of expectations, not to get upset about horrible things happening to children far away that you can't do anything about. It is not, in their world, all part of the plan. Back! So that's the dead babies. How about the adults in Galarian, or non-adults? What's the youngest that children start showing up in hell directly instead of the boneyard?
The youngest ever known of was 10 or 11, I think. In Osirian's own scries on our dead to figure out how we're doing, we haven't seen younger than 15. It's about 10% of people who go to hell, outside Cheliax, and maybe 5% to Abaddon, and 15 to the Abyss. That one varies a lot by society.
Hypothesis. 1/3 almost exactly because Pharasma balanced it that way, especially if there is any symmetrical phenomenon where 1/3 sort lawful, 1/3 chaotic. Why is he asking this? It doesn't matter to anything.
It's not renormed over time to match changes in society, if that's what you're asking, but yes, the distribution's close to even, with more neutral. On good to evil, maybe 30-40-30, and close to even with more people neutral on law to chaos, maybe also 30-40-30, and then Abaddon gets punished for not playing by the rules by letting those people choose the abyss or hell, and Nirvana has the most lawyers, and law has better lawyers than chaos.
Percentages in Cheliax.
I have no idea, honestly. We keep our own statistics for the benefit of our own population. We don't have the resources to check up on everywhere else. They claim it's 97, but they're probably lying. If I had to bet, I'd bet at 90.
Okay. It's sort of reasonable of the plot to give him 2 months to fix Galarian or destroy Cheliax, if that's how bad things are here. Like, so long as the plotline is solvable, it's better not to hang out in this mind space for too long. 2 months is fine. Keltham just has to figure out how to refit his plans into 2 months. Building up Project Lawful Neutral to at least Cheliax's level, and then leveling up as a wizard himself, is right out, for example. Maybe the story is telling him to just finish up the main plot by then. What percentage of all souls being generated are boneyard babies? And is there any reason to believe that matters are different on different planets?
I think about half of people die by the age of 5. Of course, in some places where there's lots of abortion, it's higher. That's only counting deaths after birth.
Other planets, other planes, they feed into the same afterlives. The mortals there aren't any happier in evil afterlives. Pharasma also balanced them at 1/3. Is there any known reason not to believe that?
The system is not balanced at 1/3. If people got better, more of them would go to good afterlives. I don't know anything about the situation on other planets, but there's not some requirement it be around 1/3. I think some people are happy in the evil afterlives, though almost anyone would prefer Axis.
Some people. Some people doesn't mean anything. Are we talking 1 in 10 or 1 in 10 million?
I don't know. It's not like hell lets you conduct interviews. Abadar might know and has a great deal to discuss with you anyway. Do you want to ask him?
No. He does not, because he is not just acting distressed. Right now, he is distressed, and in that state of distress, he has possibly given too much away already. Abadar doesn't strike me as the sort of god that will know. Maybe I'll ask the Iomedans at some point. Or forget about it, because he doesn't want to remind anyone of the question, and 1 in 10 wouldn't actually make much of a difference. Keltham asks a few more questions, and then indicates that he wants to rest for a quarter hour, and then talk to somebody in governance about the form of the next Project Lawful. Keltham is tired, maybe slightly dizzy from the time of night he's trying to do this. But there's no way he can go back to sleep, and the story has informed him that he was correct about the time limit and everything needing to be set in motion as quickly as possible. Probably there was no point in the story trying to hide it from him, since he'd guessed anyways.
Sure, they'll have a full update ready for him in 15 minutes. They'll also have a transcript of the conversation between Abadar's human aspect and the rest of Abadar.
Read whatever books are on hand to let his brain cool down. Don't think about 10-year-olds in hell. It's easier than he expected. A pretty large part of him seems to think this is just the premise of a teenage male edgelord thought experiment trying to force deontology violations. 3 syllables in baseline.
The report says that almost everyone who'll be a participant in Project Lawful Neutral is assembled, with the last few arriving in the morning. They have delegations from the Kalesh Empire, from Taldor, from the Magisterium in Absalom and the Academai in Corvosa, from Lastwall and Mendev and Maltune and Minkai and Rahadum. Here are everyone's credentials and the secrecy commitments they made up front, and how much funding their government can put into the project.
Keltham reads it over, nods along, reads the transcription between Abadar and Abadar's human, nods, doesn't cry again because he's already shed those tears, and the plot of the story was plain enough already. Things start tomorrow morning then. Off to speak to governance about what to tell Project Lawful Neutral.
Marinray is, under the circumstances, not going to complain about the hours. At least Keltham's not bothering the Pharaoh in the dead of night while he's trying to fend off god headaches. What can I help with?
Keltham has activated his glibness pin so that he can present the face to governance that he wants them to see. Project Lawful Neutral kicks off tomorrow, and I need to sync expectations with governance. That's not meant to be a real name if you have a better one.
Since it's not exactly secret, we'll probably want to call it something everyone can announce to great applause back in their home countries. The Peaceful Revolution or something. Doesn't seem very important to settle right now.
Sometimes these things stick even if you'd rather they wouldn't, is the conventional wisdom out of Dath Ilan, and it doesn't seem very likely that Galarian would be better at coordinating to change names. Peaceful Revolution is a bad idea, vetoed. That's begging the story to ironically twist the name.
So we spent much of yesterday discussing the story thing, and we think that, in a sense, Golarion is a world full of stories because it has powerful entities trying through small interventions to achieve large results. But you aren't, especially a story. You aren't more a story. Chemical revolution?
This is not going to be a chemistry revolution. Cheliax got a bit of chemistry, which you can get off Ione Sala. I need to give you more than they got. Medicine, metallurgy. Ideally, I can figure out things that Cheliax by its nature dares not use, or can't just copy. Neither Osirian nor Taldane really have a word that means law-aspiring thought, and if we call it the reasonable revolution, every time the project makes a decision somebody disagrees with, they will say, "Ha ha, how ironic that you called yourself the reasonable revolution." Scientific revolution is maybe the closest concept in Osirian language, although the native concept of science doesn't include key aspects like prediction markets. Anyways, after syncing up with Ione Sala, I'm now very sure that I was placed in Golarion at a place and time which would play out in a way that resulted in story patterns, tropes, appearing in the world around me. I made a number of predictions on that theory that I thought were wrong, which were actually correct, apparently, and Cheliax hid that from me. I will continue to juggle those story considerations myself if I must, because your disbelief in them is not going to make them go away.
What does juggling those story conditions look like, aside from naming things differently?
Okay, this part is classified because I do not want Cheliax knowing that I know it, that I've guessed. They can, if they know I know, change their strategy in a way that might evade the obvious things I'd try to do about it. Although this is not based purely on story reasoning, there is a chain of real-world observation and causality that mirrors the story logic. I predict that Cheliax will successfully come up with a way to neutralize my non-threatening motivation to destroy their country if they abuse my teaching, my motive to do that just to clean up after myself, in a bit less than 2 months. After that would be the obvious point for them to attack wherever the scientific revolution is locating its center of research, or, depending on how far they can get in 2 months, try to do a lot of damage to any country that supports the scientific revolution, including Osirian. My current best idea is to spend 1 month dumping everything I have into either the scientific revolution generally, or restricted sections trying to work within the Black Dome on things Cheliax shouldn't find out about. And then spend the month after that, trying to beat that deadline, on my own, doing things that I do not consider it wise to share.
I see. All right. Is there anything we can do to help you, aside from assembling the scientific revolution as quickly as possible?
That would be a more reasonable question if we weren't inside a story. The first arc just concluded with the country I tried to help betraying me. I thought at first that the second arc would play that out in a subtler way, but I now think that the story I'm in won't repeat itself that way. More likely is that it will rhyme. So, my current plan is that I do not charge non-evil attendees, students, for anything. Osirian is welcome to rope me off and charge admissions, just like I was a fruit tree somebody else planted, but I'm not accepting any of that money from anybody who isn't evil and who is not trading with me on the basis of my being an Asmodean trade partner rather than an Abedaran one, because that way, you see, I cannot be forced to betray those trade partners. You need to carry out the implied bargain Abadar made originally, where he bought just enough good treatment from Asmodeus that I could come to Osirian and explain things. You need to support my finishing out that bargain, but not otherwise try to be friends with me. There was a version of this, interaction, that Keltham considered, where he screamed at the Osirians about Abadar trading with Asmodeus, and told them that he wasn't trading with anyone who traded with Asmodeus, that Keltham was giving up his own right to be treated as an agent in protest, that Osirian could treat Keltham as a resource and sell his teachings without recompense, the same way that Abadar's trading partner Asmodeus treated the mortal souls being used as paving stones in hell. But Keltham cannot bring himself to say that, not now, not after Abadar asked him to help explain being human. Also, that story wouldn't get them to stop trying to be friends with him, now that Keltham thinks about it. Like, that wouldn't work on him.
I have no right to stop you from conducting yourself in that fashion, if you want. He looks baffled. Is there some sum of money I can offer you to talk to the Pharaoh? While masked, if you like.
The fact you think that my talking to Abadar's chosen mortal is a key event that causes me to change my mind in a way that reasonable arguments transmitted through other people would not. If you offer me 1,000,000 gold pieces to do it, The fact that you expect to get 1,000,000 gold pieces of value out of that encounter is proportionally worrying.
I think that I'm incredibly confused. There's some piece of information, or some frame or some context I'm missing that would make me less incredibly confused. Since the stakes very nearly could not be higher, it seems worth trying anything that seems reasonably likely to resolve the confusion, and the Pharaoh is specialized in communicating with aliens who see the world more like the way you see it.
So do it through a text-only channel. Same thing the complicated faction I don't want to explain right now did when they wanted to negotiate with the Dath Ilani equivalent of things with 30 splendor. It's the obvious precaution for only being persuaded by reasonable arguments instead of somebody's superpowers.
I hope that is sufficient to resolve the confusion.
Anyways, there's a lot of obvious things we can review to make sure we're on the same page about how obvious they are. Weapons research restricted, so Cheliax stays further behind on that, focusing on large explosives to use in key moments, because if we make a lot of smaller weapons, Cheliax can capture those and copy them. Scry defenses, truth spells, medical techniques, which Cheliax may care less about developing for itself. They may not come with immediate military payoffs, but they can be sold to countries and individuals to fund the project. Things that aren't obvious. I require you to not restrict access to me by, say, an emissary of Razmiran. You can truth spell them to check malicious intent to harm your valuable knowledge source. But I need to be able to talk to them and establish Asmodean trading relationships with them. If no lawful evil countries offer to work with me, then I may need to step outside the dome long enough to use ascending, and you can guard me while I do that if you think that's in your own interests. I'm going to need some resources for doing my own thing, and you cannot be my trading partner on those or be helpful about it. Just not hinder me. I did not write Project Lawful's contract with Cheliax with this exact outcome in mind. But I did write it with the thought that I might have to leave and set up in another country, and while I tried to be fair to them under those circumstances, I did not want to let an adversary be unfair to me. Cheliax needs, for example, to set a consistent value on the spell silver produced using project-derived technology, to be credited to project earnings, some of which I control. And if they set that price too low to reduce my apparent earnings, I can buy spell silver from them at a fixed premium to that price, up to a fraction of the total amount produced. Same with headbands produced on Carissa's assembly line. We need to check if that aspect of the contract actually goes through, and get started on holding them to it. If they argue, we are supposed to agree on a priest of Aurori to judge the dispute, or if we can't agree on a priest, the highest priest of Aurori and Galarian, whoever that is supposed to send us a judge. They will try for all contractually allowed delay, which makes this a potentially critical subpath. I should not have delayed 2 days on setting this in motion.
We've already checked all your contracts. I'll have the lawyers who looked at them write up a demand letter to be submitted to Cheliax.
There were things I wanted to do for the women of Osirian, but I'm not sure there's time now. If it doesn't slow down the project, it would be nice to have some new industrial or manufacturing centers be made out of Osirian women who want to own their own property and not be part of the current gender system. If it would slow things down, it might have to wait. My sense is that the policy prediction market for ideas like these is, in fact, Marin Ray, which I'm not sure actually invalidates the basic civilizational guidelines about steering using policy prediction markets. But if the policy prediction market thinks it helps Osirian's women and doesn't end with more of them in hell or the maelstrom, then I might ask for things like that, not that help myself, but that help others. If they can't have a refuge where they can go to own their own incomes, then something about intelligence scans and literacy or some other promise like that, when and if Osirian has money.
We'll send everyone to school once we're rich enough. I think once women can earn their own income sufficient to support themselves, a lot of things will change that would be very hard to change before that.
It's not really urgent, but I'm going to say it now, because now is when I'm thinking it. You cannot become a civilization like this, Marin Ray. I'm not even sure you can stay aligned to Abadar like this, once you realize what you're doing that's not Abadaran, though since I'm still a cleric of Abadar myself, the rules are apparently laxer than I would have believed. But even if you fixed that, made Osirian the way Abadar would have you make it, if he understood you, if he could tell you how to do it according to his math, I've come to suspect that maybe there isn't such a thing as a lawful neutral Dath Ilan that still holds itself together. Not only because of what I learned of Cheliax, but also because of what I saw of Osirian. Maybe an axis, with a body holding it all together more tightly, and people transforming themselves to not be quite so human, a lawful neutral civilization could work. But in mortal Dath Ilan, in some place like Golarion, the part where people care about each other is actually important.
There are goblins and ghouls and drow and stranger things still, and I don't think we can build a civilization based on caring about each other, when we don't, in fact, all care about each other. If there were only humans, it'd be different. But I'll keep that in mind.
As will I. I should not be presented to other countries as being reliable on account of being a cleric of Abadar. I think I've already warned several people about this, but consider the warning repeated. I am not sure how long my cleric bond with Abadar is going to hold up. I do not necessarily object to having cleric powers while I am a guest in Osirian, carrying out my part of a deal with Abadar. It keeps me safer while I'm here, and I can just not use those powers for anything except project matters. But I'm surprised that I am still a cleric of Abadar, and I'm not sure I'm going to be one at the end of the week, or even when the project kicks off tomorrow. If I am, fine, but don't represent me to those countries that way.
If they ask me a direct question, I will not lie to them, but I can explain that you do not want to be regarded in that fashion. I think Abadar expects mortals to have a lot that's not Abadaran in them. What matters is how you choose to conduct yourself, not what you realize or think of or wonder.
Then it may have lasted this long only because I am still unsure of some matters and have not really chosen them yet.
I hope you give yourself some time to recover and rest and make sure you're not acting out of pain and rage at what was done to you by Cheliax, righteous as that pain and rage is.
Keltham will continue to iron out details for a while, though not so long that his glibness runs out. He will then stagger off to his bedroom, looking like he is trying to rush everything under time pressure, while not even remotely recovered from his Cheliax adventure. It's even true. He's not recovered, he is trying to rush. Keltham is very much drawing on real emotions, real horror, real distress to give the impression he gives. When he excuses himself, he goes to cry real tears. When he wants to find something angry-sounding to say, within himself, he does not need to look hard. The part where stress-induced entropy is invoked to make sense of his seemingly suboptimal decisions, as if they were random noise, requiring no further explanation except his upsetness and a handful of apparent verbal explanations stitching them into a purported reasoning pattern. The part where he's apparently just rushing to conclusions out of pain and rage, and ignoring all the obvious thoughts about better meta-level process that a reader would be rolling their eyes and thinking about if they read a book character like that. Nobody out of Dath Ilan would buy it for a minute. They can't train perfect reasoning, but they can at least train not that. Golarion hopefully doesn't know any better.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.